Soup Bend, and this is the Leather Pipe Super Mini Duper Tuesday election coverage. Let's begin. On the Republican side, Senator and wooden puppet boy Ted Cruz continued his clear conservative mandate by not winning against the indomitable Trump. And yet all people can talk about in the media are shady backroom deals that might stop the moldy tangerine. But it's delusional to see anything getting in the way of Trump at this point without a nationwide epidemic of deliverance breaking out. Because he won. He's won. And the scary thing is that we're actually unsurprisingly cool with it. The majority of voters think that the candidate with the most delegates wins, and the RNC have agreed to support the nominee while still arguing that Trump is the worst thing out of America since Hoovervilles. But if the conservative establishment does endorse Trump, even tacitly, then Trump is a re-election threat. Millions of RNC dollars will soften his image over the next 6 months, and you better believe Trump will turn any more Brussels-style attacks into his favor in the general election, blaming them as Obama and thus Hillary's fault. Meanwhile, claymation candidate Ted Cruz is still trailing by 300 votes, when even his own children, his flesh and wax, don't support him.
Go with me.
Hey, let's hop out of my way.
We're taking her.
Ow!
Good jump. Good jump. Ready?
Just as the GOP has slowly lined up behind Trump like sheep to slaughter, the DNC has all too happily paved the way for candidate Clinton. And the voters lining up aren't really what matters. Because record lines in Arizona kept people at polls for 4 to 5 hours, on the same day that Hillary Clinton won the state on the strength of early balloting. Which makes the state's closure of nearly 140 polling places seem odd at best and conspiratorial at worst, especially since so many other states have had record-breaking polling numbers. How did Arizona not have the time to get ready for this? Furthermore, polls were selectively closed, with Latino Americans and independents unfairly targeted. The funny thing is, many of these voters might have gone for Clinton. We just have no idea. And there's already petitions from voters across the state to have another primary. But if you ask the woman in charge what went wrong, you might wonder why all these voters are belly aching in the first place.
Frustration. Who's to blame for this, these long lines?
Well, the voters for getting in line, maybe us for not having enough polling places.
You heard her. It's the voters' fault. It has nothing to do with confusing primary rules, closed polling places, and the fact that she still reminds me of my terrifying elementary school nurse. But we know that it's not a voter's fault for being stuck at a polling center for upwards of 4 hours. So whose fault is it? The cynic in Duke remembers Florida, when clever polls and hanging chads turned voting rights from a science to an art form. And it makes a bit of sense to disenfranchise Election Day voters if you're Debbie, Meadows, and Schultz. Hillary had a commanding lead in pre-sent ballots because senior citizens, much like dinner and death, like to get voting out of the way early. But Bernie's success comes from Election Day voters, where he statistically tied Hillary Clinton. It makes you wonder how much closer the final counts might have been if more people were allowed to vote actually on Election Day. You know, the day we set aside to vote.
Anybody behind me cannot vote.
And so what has come before you are 60 polling places.
Polls, whatever you see here, that's it.
You telling me, you need to tell them too, because this is pissing me the off. Okay.
But we would ask for your consideration. We have tried to do our very best to bring you an election that we can afford.
I think everybody should have a chance to vote.
Yeah, everybody. 7 o'clock, everybody.
I know, but the
we were
polls
in
should
line
stay
for 45
open for
minutes just
everybody
to
to
get
vote.
in line.
In cars, we were in line.
Karen, why 60 polling places? How do we get that number? I mean, why not 80? Why not 100?
And this doesn't even include provisional ballots that won't be counted, when hundreds of people who claim to be long-term Democrats were told they aren't allowed to vote due to computing errors. These voters were given provisional ballots and told that their vote would be tossed in the trash with the Nutri-Den if they were improperly registered. Many of these votes haven't even been counted yet, and we don't know how many have actually been thrown out due to computing, processing, or registration errors. But thousands of people have already complained that they were re-registered unknowingly as independents, which meant their entire vote for Bernie, Hillary, or any other Democrat was thrown out the window. And where were all the major news networks covering this gross violation of democracy? Oh, well, they were calling the race finished.
And CNN projects that Hillary Clinton will win the Arizona Democratic primary. A big win for Hillary Clinton in Arizona right now. 75 delegates are at stake for the Democrats. It's proportional, though, so Bernie Sanders will get some of those delegates. Hillary Clinton won't get them all, but this is a huge win.
That's right. CNN gave so few fucks about voting rights and polling integrity that they called the state while thousands of people were still in line to vote, even as polling places were running out of ballots and turning people away. Moreover, this is a proportional primary, meaning that every vote counts towards the number of delegates. Just like early calling doomed Florida in 2000, CNN effectively told viewers to just go home based on the strength of Hillary's pre-registered ballots. And they somehow didn't pick up on how extraordinarily conspiratorial this all sounds. Hillary wins on early ballots, so don't bother balloting at all. Based on CNN's own logic of the Arizona landslide, why though didn't they call Utah or Idaho until long after even West Coast voters were in bed? Why didn't they tell Hillary supporters to go home in those states? Because Bernie had already won it by enough of a margin that there was no chance Hillary was coming back. At the end of the day, we don't know who would have won all those disenfranchised voters in Arizona. But what's more important is being assured that we can have fair, open, and legitimate primaries. If we can't trust our vote, then we deserve to have Donald Trump roll his tangerine ass into the White House. This has been The Leather Pipe, news you're entitled to, asking you to check your primary registration requirements right now and make sure that you're a part of this democracy before it ain't a democracy anymore.